イタリウイスキーあ、イタリビールクでネバララキバシキレテおーノーそれにあのレビーあれに行くぞ Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat. And today I have a very special guest, Jonathan from the It's Complicated channel, which is one of those man on the street channels where you just basically do street interviews with people. So, first of all, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. So, first of all, I'm probably misrepresented your channel a little bit. So why don't you tell everybody what the It's Complicated channel is? And yeah, just give them the short version of that. Maybe you'll learn one day. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, wait. Some people are saying they can't hear you. Hold on a second. It's probably a setting on my end. I just have to do something with the ear trumpet. Could you say a few words? I'm going to move the audio to the right place. Yeah, so I see where the problem is. It should be here.
Check.
Okay. Yep. It's good now.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, it's good. Okay.
We're good.
So again, let's do that. Run that back. So what is the It's Complicated? Sorry about that, guys. This thing is a pain in the butt sometimes. Okay.
So basically, the It's Complicated channel is, I call it the rules of modern dating and understanding women, which when I explain that to people on the street, they often will just immediately chuckle and they'll say, oh, understanding women, like you can't understand women. Women don't know what they want or something like that. So that's kind of just a good way to create some engagement, I guess. So
yeah. So what inspired you? Like, why did you decide to do this? We were talking a little bit before the show, and you're in California now. You're originally from Jersey. You went to California to go to film school, right?
Sorry, Vegas is where I'm currently located.
Oh, Vegas is where you're at. Okay, you're on the West Coast, though.
Yes.
Or at least westward.
Yes.
So what's the story? Like, how did you come to make this content?
Well, basically just Vegas is a city where, people come and they want to try to socialize. They want, they go clubbing, they go partying and everything. And you get every culture represented out here. And I just figured, it's like I just started running into the same old issues. Like, I would talk to women and they would say, I want to find a nice guy, but then they would continually go for these bad boys. And I don't know. I started noticing a lot of contradictions between what people said that they wanted and what they actually responded to. And then, I started, observing like, MGTOW content. And I said, okay, like, what I'm hearing about women, a lot of this stuff is making sense. And so I just started formulating these questions and saying, okay, well, how would women respond to this or respond to that? And the channel kind of started where I just went out on the street and I just start having like long conversations with random people, women and also men, and just ask them about their experiences. And, people who were on vacation would stop and talk to me for 45 minutes. And I'm like, wow, people actually have a lot to unpack here and get off their chest. And I thought that was really quite flattering that people would be so giving of their time. And it almost started as almost like a street therapy session,
When were you like looking for a girlfriend or something at the time, like when this was starting to happen?
I mean, whenever I would go out, I mean, obviously I would, take notice. I mean, there's beautiful women all over this town and you can't not notice them. But, it's like, I just noticed that women tended to be very kind of standoffish. Like, you'd approach them and they seemed like they didn't want to be approached. And so I was just like, why would you even go out to be social? Why would you even go out socializing and not be social? Like women just kind of wanted to stick to their girlfriends, and they just weren't very welcoming or very approachable. And so I was thinking, well, we know when women don't want to be approached, it's very obvious. When is it okay to approach a woman? And I even did an episode about that called Being Approachable, where I asked kind of like, okay, women will say they want to go out to clubs only to dance and not be approached by men. And I'm like, well, why don't you just go to gay clubs?
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. Exactly. What was your view on relationships? What was your perspective or your beliefs about relationships before you started doing this content?
Well, I mean, we have this kind of like blue pill mindset where, you go out and you're going to, just find the right girl. And, I don't know, maybe we're all told we're going to meet some girl in high school and, maybe you'll marry your high school sweetheart or something like that. And,
were you told that? Like,
one more quick thing. I was just going to say that I believe that women were as interested in meeting men as men were interested in meeting women. And I kind of felt like I was thinking to myself, God, do women really even like men? At some point, it didn't even seem like that was the case.
Yeah. Well, before you bought into the idea that, like anybody, like, oh, there's somebody out there for everybody, and you just get out there, be confident, whatever, and you'll find someone. And it was just sort of like a belief that everybody held, right? And you probably believed it too.
Yeah, and then eventually, every guy, once he starts going out into the field and doing this kind of stuff, they quickly learn that the dating pool is not in their favor. And then we're told we have to basically learn game, and we have to, kind of put on this persona. We have to, act confident, and we have to dress a certain way, and we have to almost put on a performance. And, I've even asked this question even to I don't just question feminists on my channel. I'll also question dating coaches, and I'll be like, okay, what is the difference between seduction and manipulation? Because it's almost like we have to, almost like lie and cheat and steal our way into getting what we want from women. And it's just not a good way to start off any type of interaction, I don't believe, because the whole purpose of a relationship is you want to be your genuine, authentic self. So you have, a good relationship with somebody. You don't want to start off on a bad foot because it's just going to carry through the whole relationship.
Yeah, unless of course the goal is just to get laid. Which I think a lot of these guys, like if that's all you're interested in, you're not thinking about building anything with somebody, then maybe there's some utility to that. But I think it's good to ask the question, because basically game is, if you're not being authentic, it is not just a manipulation, but it's also like a self-erasure, because you're basically saying who I am as I am is not going to be good enough for whatever reason, so I have to like at least posture like I'm someone of higher value than I am. It's like the old, I think it was Chris Rock may have had this, he made this joke on his stand-up once where he said that when you meet someone, like on a date, you're not meeting them, you're meeting their representative.
True. Yeah.
And like over time you start to see who they really are,
but at the same time, a lot of times if you're not escalating and using these strategies to be seductive, then you often get friend zoned. And so
yes,
that's, so you kind of have to, you have to know these strategies in order to, like one of the questions, I want to do an upcoming episode about attraction. And one of the questions I love asking women is, how can a guy, when approaching a woman, how can a guy make an interaction man to woman without being creepy, while also respecting her without getting friend zoned? And it's a very...
What kind of answers did you get?
Well, some of these questions I'd have to kind of, I've only asked it like once or twice, so I have to kind of just go out and stress test it more. And
sure.
And that's kind of like what I started doing with a lot of these interviews is I would almost like just go around and practice some of the material just to kind of see what answers I would get. And then that would help me almost like anticipate with some follow-ups, because I'm like, okay, if I ask this question, 9 out of 10 times this is the answer I'm going to hear. So I'm ready for it. I like to explain it as I'm playing chess, they're playing checkers. So
yeah, and mostly you're correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically asking red pill questions in a blue pill world, right? Like you're talking to normal people on the street, so most of them are going to give you like a normie answer. Is that what you generally experience?
That's exactly it.
And what have you noticed about that, the trend of those answers? What is the blue pilled response to that you're kind of like not surprised by, but just for people watching? Because I'm sure you've asked a lot of people a lot of questions.
The fact that a lot of people have this very gynocentric mindset where, you know, women are the prize and, you know, women are sacred, and, you know, it's all about men having to prove themselves to women. Yeah. So.
Okay, well, let's back up for just a second. Because there's a couple of terms that came out, and I think I want to like dive into them a little bit, and let's see if we can't refine the definitions, because I think a lot of these words get misused sometimes. So first of all, you mentioned gynocentrism. So what is meant by that? I mean, you said women are the prize. Is that generally the short version of what you think it means?
I would define gynocentrism simply as a society that places women on a pedestal. Women are elevated above men. So it's the idea of, you know, men have to prove themselves to be worthy of a woman. It's the romantic model of, you know, we look at like romantic chivalry and this idea that, you know, men have to get down on one knee and profess his love to the woman, and men have to be willing to sacrifice themselves for the woman, and men have to basically provide for the woman. And I think that's kind of the root problem that we're facing here. And a lot of people who even want to call themselves red pill, I think, are unaware of a lot of the things that they're promoting feed into gynocentrism.
So by gynocentrism, what we're basically saying is that essentially a woman's worth as a woman is inherent. A man's worth is dependent on what he does. So it's sort of like, you know how people say this is what a real man does? And a lot of it comes from like traditionalists, right? But not just that. Feminists do the same thing. They'll throw it in your face all the same. But there is no such thing as becoming a woman. Like a woman is a woman by default. She just turns 18 and she's a woman. A man has to do something, you know, be of some quality or achieve something to be seen as a man. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's many maxims that are passed around in this space. Women are born, men are made. Or women are born with their value, men must create their value, things like that. Or women must preserve their value, things like that.
Yeah.
So it's basically saying in an indirect way that men don't have any intrinsic value. And so it feeds into that kind of male disposability thing that I think is dehumanizing of men. And that's something that is a big problem that is not addressed nearly enough in the manosphere. It's almost like you're just accepting these terms and saying, okay, now we have to navigate this problem rather than let's fix this problem.
Yeah. Okay, I want to say real quick to the chat. So first off, if you guys want to send us a message, I will read it on screen. Send a super chat or a Rumble rant or a super chow by going to feedthebadger.com/just the tip to send us a super chow. I see people in the vertical chat asking if I take questions in live stream. Send them as a super chat or a super chow and I will take them. But I do see your chat. I just don't want to spend a lot of time reading the chat, but I appreciate you guys being here on stream and I am looking at your chat. All right, but anyway, so men are human doings and women are human beings, right? So yeah. Like, and okay, so this, when you say because you mentioned the red pill or the manosphere, how do you define that? Are the red pill, what's the red pill? Is that different from us? We're called MRAs. Is that different? Is that the same?
Well, there's many different voices in the space. I would say that the manosphere is kind of like the umbrella term that encompasses all the different voices in the space. But, you know, there's MRAs, there's MGTOW, there's red pillars, there's obviously the different factions of the red pill. There's black pill, there's purple pill. There's even there's even a new growing term that actually was the inception of it was actually on Shah's channel. Shah is a friend of It's Complicated, and basically shout out to him. He on his stream, they a lot of the concepts that they were discussing kind of got, I guess, encapsulated, if you will, by this new term called the gold pill. And the gold pill is just this new, it's almost like what we would describe as a paradigm shift, where we're almost like saying that it's, in its simplest form, a rejection of the romantic model and the idea that a woman should be expected to bring some type of financial contribution to a relationship instead of expecting the man to be the sole provider, and almost see him as less masculine if he doesn't take on that burden.
Right. And but is that a new idea though? Because I think historically that's been the case for most of our history. It's just that since we introduced the concept of romantic chivalry, not knightly chivalry like whatever was before, but this romantic chivalry model, that's when it's changed. Like there was this idea that men had to, were expected to be to bring all of the security and the stability and the finances and on the property and everything to the table, where women don't have to bring anything, or even worse, they could bring debt. That's what happens a lot now. But wasn't it the case that in the past a marriage was more like a business agreement?
Yes, and this goes perfectly into the conversation about the dowry. And the dowry was basically, when you had these arranged marriages, there was basically the dowry system where women were a dowry basically refers to money or property brought by a bride's family to her husband on their marriage, and it was a pre-mortem inheritance from the bride's father that would be used to kind of set. It was a conjugal fund, and it would be used to set up the new household. And I did an episode about this, but I was inspired to do it because Shah was somebody who did a lot of the research on just the history of dowry, and also there was another concept called bride price or bride wealth. But marriage was looked at as it was a marriage transaction, and so what I started to come up with is questions about how did we go from this dowry system to this romantic model, and came up with questions like, okay, if women have always been the prize, why did the concept of a dowry ever exist in the first place? And why is it that women brought more to the table when they weren't working and bring less to the table now that they are working? And so these are important questions to ask. And what I think is especially interesting is now you have all these Tradcons or traditional conservatives who are pushing this idea of traditional marriage today, but they're going off of a 1950s model instead of the way that marriage was done for thousands of years through United Christendom. And they have this kind of like this idea that they just never bring up the concept of a dowry. And I'm just very interested to find out why. Is that just out of ignorance, or are they kind of just, if
I had to guess, I would say it's ignorance more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of people who call themselves trad are just feminists from like 30 years ago. So I think that feminism is the water we swim in, and it just depends on how deep you are in that ocean. Like look at Tommy Lauren. I don't know if you know who that is, but she's like a female conservative commentator that went on this whole thing about like, men aren't stepping up to the plate well enough, and the pickings are slim and all of this. And she had no answer for like, what is it that you bring to the table? Because so yeah, the thing is like, I don't think there are really many Tradcons at all. I think that there are people who call themselves that, but they're still feminists from the 60s. And a lot of them, if you ask them, like if you really challenge their beliefs about women, or at least the dynamics between women and men, or whether or not the feminist movement had, you know, a utility at any point in history, they'll all fall back on some older wave without questioning the root of it itself. And I think that part of the reason why we're living under this, it's not even a romantic model, because men and women are not pairing up, you know, like it's actually, I think that ever since we introduced that, if you look at, and I mean, I don't have the data in front of me or anything, so I'm just, this is my instinct speaking here. I bet that the dramatic increase in things like divorce and child custody battles and child support and alimony, there is probably a correlation between when we stopped, you know, essentially like marrying in our own communities to people who we knew very well, who our families knew really well. If you think about not necessarily before the internet, but before dating had gone really like out there, and most of it was like pretty contained, like, you know, a boy and a girl know each other from school. They only knew people in their own little town. They married who they were close to. All their families knew each other. They already vetted each other, and that would be like the impetus for that. And in some communities, like today, that still happens. Like if you go to like, you know, where the Amish are, or like the Mormons or something like that. So it's not like it's gone away. Even where I live, you know, there is a lot of that where people, you know, like, oh, I just knew her my whole life and we're going to get married, and they would just do that and there'd be no issue. So there must be like something about modernity that is doing this. And I think that a lot of Tradcons, especially the ones online, they're not Tradcons at all. They're just feminists. They're just like second wave feminists, you know?
1000% agree. And I saw this debate with Tommy Lauren and Andrew Wilson, who's
yes,
and basically he was calling her a covert feminist. And I've been aware of this. I did an episode at a cowboy convention called Undercover Feminists. But yeah, I mean, basically they're cosplaying. But yeah, but to go a little bit further on that point, if we're able to identify women as, you know, these Tradcon women as covert feminists, why don't we go a little bit further and realize that when Tradcon men say the same thing as Tradcon women, why aren't they also labeled covert feminists?
I wouldn't even call them covert feminists. I would just call them feminists.
Or feminists. But
yeah, I would just call them feminists because that's what they're doing.
But the issue is, why are we only calling out the trad women for being feminists and not the trad men for also being feminists? They're saying the same thing, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we do on this channel. We call that out all the time because those men, well, they're just blue pilled. Like that's kind of like ultimately, like if you're a blue pilled person, then you're a feminist, because feminism is, like I said, it's the air we breathe, the water we swim in. It is our world, right? As it is. That's what it's like. Gynocentrism is a really useful tool for feminists. That's why sometimes, like when what a trad claims and what a feminist claim, they're very similar because they work in tandem. Like there's no real difference between them, except, you know, I guess like the paint job, because they call themselves something else. But I mean, like, you know, a person can say that they're a woman, but that doesn't make them a woman. A person can say they're not a feminist, but that doesn't mean they're not, right?
Yeah.
It just comes down to what they actually believe. So
yeah, well, obviously, feminists and Tradcons are basically, what's the expression? Are two sides of the same gynocentric coin, basically.
Yeah, they serve each other, and they don't, like when you mentioned the 50s thing, I don't think people even know what the 50s was like. Like it wasn't like, that's not even the 50s. That's like the 50s as imagined through media.
Correct.
Like, oh, Leave It to Beaver. Like nobody lived that way though.
Correct.
So like even that, you know, it's kind of like Mad Men. Like people, they think they invoke these fictions, this stuff in our media to say this is what it was like. It's like, no, it wasn't actually like that at all. And Hollywood's been lying to you forever about reality, and you're referencing lies to make claims about reality. And so you got nothing, right?
Yeah, women want their relationships to be like The Notebook.
Yeah, exactly. And dude, as a man, I really don't, because that movie was a nightmare for a man. Yeah. But I got a super chat from Alex W, who gets us $5. I'm gonna read it really quick. For the record, guys, I'll do the super chats and super chats as a batch, at the top of the hour or in the or whatever. So Alex W says for $5, gonna check this out later on new tech platforms. Super chat for the algo. Thank you. We need help with our algorithm because it does not like us very much. So anyway, so like, how long have you been doing this show? These man on the street things?
I started doing it in 2019, and they, I haven't posted everything I've ever shot, but some of my earliest stuff is still on the channel, and they're just raw interviews. And I would just go up and just kind of like challenge these blue pill people, and I'd essentially have conversations and feed them the red pill live on camera and say, okay, like, what do you think about marriage? Do you think marriage is a fair deal? What's the incentive for that? And I started noticing that people would say, that's a really good question. And I could have, if my channel wasn't called It's Complicated, it could have easily been called That's a Good Question, because it showed me the lack of self-awareness. Like, people have never, ever really gone past level 1 to really think about what they're signing up for. And I thought that was fascinating. And, I said, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. And I just went down this rabbit hole. And the more that questions just led to more questions and more questions. And sometimes they even lead to answers. So.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for about 6 years.
Yes.
Have you noticed any shift in the kind of like general responses that you get over that time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The fact that, I think that this manosphere has almost gone through this collective red pill rage stage where now, you just see all these viral videos all over the internet from all these podcasts, which, some of them I have mixed feelings about them, but we obviously can see that.
Like which one? Like the whatever podcast kind of a thing?
Podcast, and there's like the Fresh and Fit podcast and a lot of, and you'll see these viral clips where we see that women are asking for 300K, these super high status guys that just, we're starting to see a collective pattern of women just being delusional on these shows. And so what ends up happening is now when I start interviewing men, they are more aware of the fact that women want 6 feet tall, 6-pack abs, 6-figure income, things like that. And so I think that there is some progress, at least in terms of how people realize what the game truly is now. But I think that I think some of the descriptions are accurate, but I start to run into issues when we talk about the prescriptions and how to cope with these issues.
Yeah, for sure. How to deal with it. So you say there is a shift, but it sounds like, is it more men that you think are like getting more red pill by this, or women also?
Men definitely more than women. I would say that, I don't know, when I first started doing this, women, I still get a lot of the women with the open misandry, but I'll kind of like set up a question in a certain way, like, okay, are women's dating standards too high, or are men just lazy? And for the most part, they go into, men just need to man up, men need to step up, things like that. But occasionally I'll get a woman who says women's standards are just way too high. So there are some women out there who are waking up and realizing that, a lot of modern women are delusional. If you look at my subscriber base, there are women who actually follow my channel and are supportive of men. But I think what almost happens, though, a lot of times is there are some women who might say, okay, I don't agree with feminism, but then they'll just label themselves, I'm traditional. And based on what we described earlier, traditionalism is still feminism. So,
yes.
Just because you're anti-feminist doesn't necessarily mean that you're pro-men.
No, people want to treat it like a salad bar. They want to take what they want and leave the rest. So you're going to get, that's what's going to happen though, because it's a very scary thing to actually confront, like this dynamic and where things are headed. I think that men are more open to it. Obviously, they're affected by the landscape of dating and everything, so they're more likely to be in that position. And I think that men are really waking up like fast and over time. But it's very difficult to shake, which is why, going back to what you were saying about the red pill guys, that they're still gynocentric in that they will use their success for women as a way of demonstrating their status, right? Mm-hmm. So when they say, well, look, I've been with all these women, that means I'm more of a man than you, which I know I've seen them do. It's like, dude, you're playing right into their hand. Like, this is the problem, is the fact that you measure your worth as a man based on how much approval you get from women. That's just like a male feminist that would, go out and say, well, I unlike those misogynist guys over at the whatever podcast and Fresh and Fit, I respect women. They're playing the exact same game because they're measuring their worth based on how women are affected by them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Of course, there's this term called hoflation, which
yes.
the meme goes, men today have to work 5 times harder than their grandfathers did for women 20 times worse than what their grandmothers were. And yet these guys are giving the same prescription that men need to boss up and increase their value. And I'm saying, okay, so aren't you just feeding the very hoflation problem that you're complaining about?
Yeah. And again, they probably say they don't care because they're still kind of in their own, they have their own hedonistic problems that they're wrestling with. So yeah, that's the issue. So have you ever had any like negative confrontations with people doing this stuff?
Well, I try to keep my tone very non-judgmental and not accusatory, because I want people to feel like I don't really care what you believe. I just want to know why. However, there have been a couple times where people have gotten triggered. I mean, there's obviously sometimes the most viral stuff is when it's a heated, blood sport debate. There was one time where this girl was just yelling at me and it just went back and forth. There was another time where she was a feminist. There was another time where I actually triggered this cowboy during my undercover feminist episode, where I would ask him follow-up questions and he just got triggered and said, look, I'm not going to argue with you. You're asking for my opinions and I'm not trying to have an argument here. And I said, well, look, I'm just trying to go a little bit deeper and find out why. But I would say, as far as like the time where it got really out of control, there's an episode I just said, it's complicated, gets attacked. And I was interviewing this girl, and these 3 guys who were just, I don't know, they were just trolls. This one guy, he's actually wearing a GoPro in the footage, and he just comes up and starts calling me, whatever, like I abused children and I, all sorts of just accusatory things that were just absolutely not true, and getting in my face. And I just started recording the interaction. And this girl that I was interviewing actually defended me, which was kind of funny. But yeah, that's on my channel. It wasn't really anything that had to do with like, I was interviewing somebody and then they just got triggered. These guys were just trolling me. But yeah,
sure.
That's just,
and they were also trying to they were recording this on their end.
Yeah, I think they were like clout chasers, like almost like kind of like Jackass style, where they just wanted to just create a scene and record it and try to create a viral moment or something like that. So
yeah, and that was in Vegas too. I'm sure there's a lot of that goes on in these big cities.
I'll tell you this: Vegas, especially the Vegas Strip, is one of the hardest locations to film in. I mean, yesterday I was out and I was trying to film this one girl and get this interview at 2 a.m, where I figured, okay, there's not a lot of street performers, there's not a lot of cars on the street, but there was construction and jackhammering going on at 2 a.m. Always under construction, and there's always noise, and it's really hard to the hardest part of my job is just trying to find a quiet area where I can record just some clean dialogue.
Yeah, I bet. So I got a Rumble rant, and I was going to bring this up to your attention too, so I'm glad that NovaFan put this through. NovaFan21 gave us $1 on Rumble and said, at its complicated, some studies have been showing the youngest generation of women have become more progressive than past generations of women. Have you seen this more reflected lately?
Well, I mean, I definitely see that. I think that men are leaning right and women are leaning left. And I think that I've said this before. I think that the gender divide is almost like a mirror for the political divide. And I think that I did an episode. It brings up an episode that I did called Economically Socialist, Romantically Capitalist. That's what I think women are. I think that when it comes to dating, women want a meritocracy. They want the best and most qualified. But when it comes to everything else, they want equality and fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they want they want socialism when it comes to the job market. They want the standards lowered for them. And that's the thing. It's like why don't we have dating socialism for men? You know what I mean? Why don't women lower the standards for men? But you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that was kind of interesting there. So
yeah. Well, actually, the truth is that men have only moved slightly right. Like it's just like a slight movement away from progressive, and women have gone super far left. And you're right about the political divide. And I've been saying that for years. I've said that the reason why we have two wings is because we have two sexes, and one of them is more concerned with security, that's women, and one of them more concerned with liberty, that tends to be men. Not an absolute statement, but I think in general, if you look at what men tend to value and what women tend to value, what women tend to value lands more in the security and equality camp, and what men tend to value lands more in the freedom and meritocracy camp, right?
And I also think that women benefit from wanting bigger government because government has basically replaced men. Women don't need men anymore as providers because now the government provides for them through the welfare system. And
exactly.
Yeah. So
yeah. Okay, so NovaFan sent another Rumble rant. Thank you, NovaFan, for $1, and he says it's complicated. I keep hearing feminists say it's only gotten worse for women as time goes on, like in terms of women are more oppressed than ever. Does this attitude reflect your more recent interviews? Have men become more misogynistic for you?
I think that that could be perceived, because I think that a lot of the problems with the red pill or the manosphere is that it sometimes comes across, or it could be perceived as a male supremacy movement. Like we're trying to basically reinstate patriarchy and a patriarchal structure where, we want women to go back to the kitchen. We want women to go back to the way that they were before feminism. Whereas I don't think that is necessarily my goal or what I think is going to even be possible, because that would require taking away women's rights. And that's something that just is not really feasible. And I don't really think that that's even moral to do that. I think a better option is we need to focus more on men's liberation. If women have been liberated from their traditional roles, I think men kind of have to be liberated from their traditional roles. Otherwise, you create this imbalance where men are almost put in this simping dynamic where we have to conform to what society dictates that a real man should be, versus women can be whatever they want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, men subsidize women's choices, like through the government.
Yes.
And I guess we're at a crossroads. You were talking about how the prescription is where there's a lot of divergence. Like we all see the problem, but a lot of people have different ideas about what the solution going forward is. So you're proposing that men be liberated in the same way that women be liberated, or at least something like that.
Well, at least be headed in that direction. Like I think that masculinity needs to be redefined. I think that there's nothing inherently wrong with masculinity, but when masculinity has almost been co-opted, where you're not a real man unless you do A, B, and C, then we're basically being controlled through through the definition of masculinity by being expected to conform to this prescripted masculine identity. Otherwise, you're not a real man.
Mm-hmm. I got a rumble. I want to say something about that, but I got a rumble rant from Sean Mao, and they say socialized dating sees the means of reproduction. Sarcasm. Okay, thank you. And then Xeranx gave us, well, he's a member. Thank you, Xeranx. And he says patriarchy is not a bad thing in that respect, and doesn't express hatred. Home is where the heart is. Women at home tend to the nexus of the family. All right. So thank you for your comments. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I think that there's two ways it can go. Either we liberate men more, and maybe, like you're saying, essentially open up what it means to be a man, like sort of open up the definition of masculinity. Would you say that's fair, what I'm saying?
I agree, but what often happens is you run the risk of being labeled a feminist when you do that, because right now there's this whole masculinity movement. A lot of people think that masculinity is the solution. Like, we need strong men, to get things back in order. And when you think about what they're pushing, it's almost like they're trying to shame men back into being this utility to serve women. And that just feeds right back into the gynocentrism. I think that when you talk about subsidizing women, it's like, what needs are women currently being deprived that they're forced to be with men? I don't really see anything, because the government pretty much, takes care of women. But men are being deprived needs that they're forced to be with women. And I don't know, a lot of people talk about, like, when these AI bots come out, then all of a sudden men won't have to deal with women because we'll all have, an AI girlfriend or something. I say, why not just have legal prostitution, brothels, where it's safe and regulated? Because of men, so many men are controlled by women through these three superpowers. I call it the Holy Trinity. Women have sexual power over men. They have the victimhood power over men, because our societies believe all women, blame all men. And they have chivalry power, which is basically the romantic model of, women are the prize, women are on a pedestal. And so how do you even compete with that? Women, so we have to kind of chip away and try to, balance the neutralize these powers that women have, so men have more of a level playing field. Otherwise, women just become this liability, and the only solution is for men to go MGTOW and just not even engage.
Yeah. I mean, all that sounds, yeah, I've heard all of this before as a proposal. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about, like, what's going to be sustainable? Because what I'm worried about is that our birth rates are falling, and it's going to get to a point where the infrastructure will not be able to be sustained, because it is sustained by people, mostly men, almost all men, really. And we're going to, like, if everybody's with prostitutes and sex robots, then they're not pairing up, right? And they're not making babies. And a lot of the artificial ways that we do that are not really as effective or reliable as we're led to believe. Like, some crazy high percentage of sperm in a sperm bank is, like, inviable. Like, it doesn't actually result in pregnancy. And so what I think would be the most, because I want the human species to thrive. Sure. So what I think we should find a way to, like, move towards that. But in terms of there is another side to the coin of, like, do we liberate men? What if, and this is what I'm thinking about, I think that it's time that women are held accountable. And I think that what we should be doing is, if there is such a thing as a real man, and I think that there should be a lot of wiggle room in that. I'm not going to go with some weird, like, 1950s, stereotype of what that is, because there are real men of all different kinds that work in intellectual pursuits, creative pursuits, and, whatever. But we should also be thinking about what a real woman is and what that looks like. And maybe women should become in the same way that, because I think that men becoming, despite all the hardship, is how we got all of this that we have. This society that we live in, all of this advanced technology, all the ability for you and I to talk across the country on the internet, like, men did that. And it was not because they were just liberated to do it. It was because men feel inside them a need to build. And if they're building for something like their legacy, like their children, then they're going to be way more inspired to do that. But we don't do that to women. We've liberated them from everything, and they're miserable, right? Like their happiness is in the toilet, and they're just becoming more and more demanding. So it's like, well, maybe women need a calling, and they need people that are going to hold their feet to the fire and say, you need to like woman up. Like maybe that's what we need. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, a lot of times people say, well, women are allergic to accountability. They don't like accountability. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable. I mean, criminals and children don't like accountability. There needs to be accountability placed on women. And I mean, I'm not going this far, but I mean, you could ask the question, if men are supposed to be conscripted into war, why aren't women conscripted to have children? But with women, it's her body, her choice. But when it comes, it's not our body, our choice. And as
that's tough.
And as far as society goes, I mean, it really just comes down to you have to have skin in the game and feel like there's some type of incentive for you. I believe personally, I've said this before, I believe if men could get sex anytime they want, would there be any reason to be with a woman other than love? So maybe relationships would be better. I don't know. I mean, I heard in Japan, brothels have saved marriages, things like that. I'm not sure because, if you're stuck in a marriage and it's a dead bedroom, I mean, I don't know all the details on that, so I don't really want to speak too much on it. But I'm just saying that it seems like women aren't really interested in the greater good of society. They're just interested in their own personal happiness and freedom.
So I mean, I think they are right now. Like I said, they've gone like farther, like super progressive in this last generation.
Right.
But they are also starting to, like, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's been like a spate of articles, thought pieces, and they've been going like steadily for a while, but they've really ramped up recently where it's like, please men come back, where are the men, And I knew this was going to happen. I called it back when I started doing this. I said that if enough men go MGTOW, and I want to talk a little bit about MGTOW because I think it's a very important part of this, women will suffer, and then when the suffering reaches a certain point, they will probably start to, like hopefully look in the mirror. No promises. We don't know. Yeah. But like that's kind of like there's only two ways that's going to work, that where women start to correct their behavior or at least like analyze it. One is if other women call them out, which I think is because men don't really have the power to do that. So other women will have to call them out, which I am starting to see, or if they are lonely enough and they start suffering and they start getting baby rabies and all of that, because that is what happens is a lot of these millennial women, for example, that was when this really started to go off the rails, was when the millennial women, they are now getting into their 40s and they're like, I'm alone. What the hell? I'm very unhappy. I want to fix that. But unfortunately, a lot of them are not going to find anybody, right? Because it's too late for them. So maybe they'll start to like call each other out. So that's the one side. But the other side is if enough MGTOW check out, they'll suffer. And they'll suffer because they're alone. So
well, a couple things about that. First off, I was thinking if 80% of men are already invisible to, if 80% of men are already deemed invisible to women, then taking yourself off the market, is that really going to have an effect if you're already invisible to most women anyway? However, a lot of women still, I'm very skeptical of that, because when women want men to come back, they essentially just say they want men to come back and be utilities. So, if we come back, we have to come back on different terms. If we come back on the same old terms, then we haven't made any progress at all. The other thing is the fact that when we're talking about, the lack of awareness of women to even, self-analyze and understand like, okay, what's going on here? What about all these people in the mainstream media who are, I've seen countless news stories about people saying men are struggling, and they just have no awareness to why men are checking out. They just say, well, men are weak and men would rather stay home and play video games and watch OnlyFans or whatever men choose to do, but they're not asking what is it that the women are doing or the society is doing to drive men to check out.
I think that in the mainstream, for sure, they're asking the question. They know that there's a problem, but they're unwilling, and I think it's moral cowardice to face why this is happening. And one of the ways they avoid it is by not talking to men directly.
Bingo.
But what you're going to see is in the mainstream, like like your 3-letter news agencies or whatever, like the big mainstream legacy media outlets, they're going to continue to ignore the problem. And if they do get a man on to talk about it, they're probably just going to shame him for not manning up enough. But on the growing alternative space, there are conversations happening. Now, the people, like, I just saw like a long debate on, do you know about the channel called Diary of a CEO?
Yes, and I just saw that.
You saw the feminist debate that they had about men?
Yes.
And so like that, okay, so not very far along. They don't get it yet, but they are talking about it. So I do think that it's getting to the point where they can't really avoid the topic. So like we gotta have to talk about this, but they're just unequipped to talk about it. And what I'm hoping for is that it will get to the point where somebody that actually knows something is going to be on. But I think that they're still stuck in this mindset of, if we actually have to listen to what men actually think, they might say something misogynistic. And that's the last thing we want, right? And I think that that's just a silly thing to go on, because I don't think, honestly, misogyny exists.
Yeah.
I don't. I think that men get frustrated. Like, for example, why do you think, here's something that I wanted to bring up before. If MGTOW are actually removing themselves from the equation and they're just not interacting with women, why do feminists, or just anybody for that matter, but I just say feminists because I'm applying it to everybody, why do they still insist that there's something about them that's evil when they're actually not putting themselves around women? Like, if MGTOW are dangerous to women, but they're not around women because they're checking out, right, why do these people still shame them?
Great question. I don't know. I guess it's just because the entitlement of, seeing men as utilities. And if you're not serving women, then, yeah, I mean, obviously, if a man puts his own needs ahead of women, he's going to be seen as selfish. Better example. Why is it that society will shame men for going their own way as a MGTOW, but it celebrates women for being an independent woman?
Doing the Sex and the City thing, which I just saw an article about. That was like American women are, basically like checking out of, like, they are finding their happiness without a man or something like that, right? Which, by the way, has been promoted for a long time. Like, this isn't like a new thing. And you're right. I mean, because ultimately what it is about MGTOW that these people hate is that they can't control them anymore. They can't put them in a position where, because what ultimately they're saying is, we don't want you to leave. We want you to stay around women, but we want you to not want to be around them. We just want you there. We want you to be serving us without expecting anything, right?
I think MGTOW, honestly, is the most effective, because men have to protest in some way in order to make any difference, because I think that they all require men's participation. Like, I talked about this on a recent interview. I was on Just Pearly Things, and I talked about the fact that everyone is exploiting lonely men right now. I think that the male loneliness epidemic is by design. Just follow the money. You've got feminists exploiting lonely men to sell them OnlyFans. You've got Tradcons exploiting lonely men to sell them marriage, which is an unfair deal. And you've got dating coaches who want to exploit lonely men to sell them courses and self-improvement. So society is incentivized to keep men sexually frustrated and lonely because sex sells. I think that there's a lot of money to be made in men's exploitation and men's oppression.
Yeah.
And yeah. One other thing I wanted to respond to earlier also that you said, that's on my channel. I try to hit the streets and talk to the average man, talk to the people who actually have gone through these things or are going through these things, and try to get give these people a voice, because on a lot of these podcasts or on a lot of the mainstream media, they're talking on behalf of men, or they're talking at men. They're not talking to men. And so I think that when we talk to people who actually are dealing with it or going through it, you're going to get a better representation. And that's basically what's not happening. And so I want to be able to offer something different in that aspect.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, again, like when it comes to relationships, which is not really our particular focus, when we talk about the legal and the legislative and things like due process and all that. Yeah. But we do talk about dating, because if men and women are not pairing up, then like we're just wasting our time. Like everything's going to be done. But when it comes to the MGTOW thing, I think that is a very effective means of protest, because, it is said that women are the gatekeepers of sex, but men are the gatekeepers of commitment. So like if a man, like if he holds his ground and says, I will not get involved with someone at all unless because women, a lot of them are looking for like the ring or something, especially as they get older. But men have to realize they have that leverage, that they can control that. Now, it's not a lot, because again, we talk about the divorce courts and all these other things that are just a crazy a minefield for men, rather. And I think that's why men typically go the MGTOW route, but even then, like there have been stories of men who have, done everything they can to avoid women, and they end up falsely accused of something or in some kind of trouble. I mean, the Me Too movement has destroyed companies where they just go through and accuse men of stuff, and then they give those jobs to women because the unions get in on it, and it's like tanked the company, and this happens everywhere. So it's like one of these things where you almost have to weather it until the damage is done, and then see who comes out of it with a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Humility. Like, oh, I was wrong about all that. But yeah.
Well, what I don't understand is why does so much of the advice that men are getting online is about how to navigate this minefield, rather than let's all work collectively together and remove the mines.
Well, that's why I do this work that I do, because, I have spoken to, for example, there's a big problem in the military with the kind of like Title IX, Mary Koss. Okay, so you have these studies, and I'm just going to use the word because I don't like censoring myself. So the rape culture studies that are cited were basically based on a woman's work named Mary Koss, who was all about distorting the figures so that you get like the highest possible number. So it's like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women are raped in college campuses or whatever, right? And this has created a climate of false allegations and a lot of damage and fear, because I mean, like if you're a woman and you hear that stat, you're going to be like, well, I don't want to be around men ever. So, right, like, why is Gen Z having less sex than ever? Well, there's a number of factors. And I think one of them is that fear of, like, getting involved with anybody. But that has also, it's not only in our college campuses, it's happening in our military. And I have had a series of men on, and women who are, like, the mothers of, soldiers who have had, like, absolutely devastating experiences with false allegations. Most of the time it's because somebody was cheating and there was infidelity, and they were embarrassed, or they didn't want to get caught, so they just made an allegation instead or something like that. And these guys, they go to jail, they get dishonorably discharged, they end up on a sex offender registry, they have to tell everybody in the new community they live in about their circumstances. So we're trying to change the laws, and we are working on that. And I think that you have to change the laws, so that's like the top-down thing. But also there has to be a bottom-up change where you shift the culture, so that these beliefs, they're all based on myths. And as soon as we kill the myths off, then maybe some people will start to, act rationally.
Yeah, we definitely have to change the laws and the culture. Absolutely, that's a two-part thing. But it reminds me, I did an episode recently called "What Is Consent," where I was talking about.
I watched it.
Yeah, and what's crazy, thank you. What's interesting is the fact that so many people struggled to define what consent actually means. And I was like, okay, well, if women struggle to understand consent, why are men expected to understand it? And there's all these hypothetical scenarios where, it's like, okay, is it any wonder why some of the numbers are so high? I mean, when you're defining regret as grape, then, the numbers might be artificially inflated. And on top of that, a good comparison to those numbers being manipulated, look at how the numbers are manipulated when we're talking about the wage gap. More misinterpretation and misinformation to make something that's not happening look like it is happening.
Yeah, I was just thinking the consent thing is tough because it is very subjective.
Correct.
And I hate to tell you that, but it's the truth. Like, whether or not someone feels like, or a woman feels like, she didn't give consent is completely arbitrary. It's just what she feels. And that's a problem. That's why I say, maybe men should not get involved with women physically. Maybe sex should not be a goal, because if you don't, like, for example, if she's into something kinky, and this has happened, we've seen like false allegations come out because women wanted to be choked, and then the guy's like, okay, if this is what you're into, and then she accuses him of abusing her, and she has the bruises to prove it. So it's like, well, what are you gonna do? So to me anyway, like, I think that men should be very, very, I bear to say it, but conservative with their sexuality. I think it might just be safer because you don't know, and again, we can't define it. Women can't define it. Plus, the numbers are extremely inflated because it could be, again, it just depends on how she feels. Like, if she just regrets having done something, like she gets drunk and he gets drunk, like, the Brock Turner case. Have you heard about that?
With that particular case.
So Brock Turner was like I think he was like in a college in Ohio, maybe. I can't remember the state exactly. And he and a girl he was seeing, but she had a boyfriend with somebody else, but he didn't know that, and they got involved at a party. I think it was at a frat house, and they both got wasted, and they were like doing foreplay but like outside behind a dumpster or something. And she passed out, and he was like almost passed out, and these guys showed up and they saw him there, and I guess they like kicked his ass and called the cops or something. And it turned to this whole thing where he was assumed to have raped her because she was unconscious and he was barely conscious, and it turned to a big like media circus, and there were people outside of his house with guns, and he had to like stay like in his home. It later came out that he was not guilty because they were both drunk. Yeah. And so it's one of those things, okay, so if it's not consent, if somebody's drunk, what is it when they're both drunk and they do something? And what is it when, like, different people have different tolerance for liquor? So if somebody else is more drunk than somebody, is the person who's less drunk the offender? And why is it only goes one way? Because if women rape men, we don't even call it rape. We call it sexual assault. It's not even at the same level. Well,
I just did a short or a clip about this where I said, if it's basically I said, why are the consent laws targeting heterosexual men when the same situation in a gay couple wouldn't even be a crime?
Yeah, they often like have sex when they're drunk or on drugs. Like, that's a common thing.
I'm living in Vegas. It's a nightlife culture. Most hookups happen under drunken conditions. So I even asked the question, are we going to outlaw drunk sex? Does that mean anyone who's ever had drunk sex is grape? Like where do you want to take this? And I've actually done 2 episodes about consent. I did one like 3 years ago where I said, are we headed towards needing consent contracts? Is that where things are headed? And I even remember there was an app at one point where you had to get people to give consent. And even if that's the case, like, what determines what should and should not be spontaneous during sex? Do you have to have like a list of an itemized list of all the different things? Like, oh, well, we can do this, but if you do anal or I don't want to go too graphic, but the point is, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. And
it is.
And men are the ones who are typically expected to be the initiators. And it's like playing with fire. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like, why can't we just have a common sense, you know, evidence-based set of rules for this? Or is it possible, like on the other side, like you're on the side of like, let's make more liberation, more ability to access, like legally and safely with things like prostitution. Or we go the other way and we basically like become more like, was hookup culture a mistake? Should we be asking that question? Is the dating model like all wrong? Like what's wrong? Because like, it's changed from like dating somebody that you went to school with or work with.
Well, let me ask this for a second. Back in like the 60s, when we had that free love movement, it was essentially like a hookup culture. What about all the Me Too accusations back then? Why wasn't consent a huge, outrage back then? Why did men and women just figure it out?
I think that it probably did happen, but it wasn't publicized as much.
Okay.
Because the second wave feminist movement definitely had, rape culture baked in. I mean, Mary Koss's study, I think, came out in the 70s. I don't know off the top of my head, but it was like something that was in the lexicon as being discussed at the time. I think that part of it was that at that time, you still dated people that you knew or like was in your community. And if you went to like Woodstock or something and you ended up, because that the free love thing was definitely going on. There were orgies and drug fueled escapades. I know like Charlie Manson had like a whole cult of people that were just, banging each other all the time. So I think that was going on, but I guess it just like, we didn't make it as much of an issue. And I think a lot of it had to do with that. Maybe the men weren't complaining. Maybe the mindset was that if you were a man and you got raped by a woman, you were just lucky, like that was, and that's still kind of a mindset, right? Like sure. When you hear these stories of school teachers that prey on their on the students, and then guys go, oh, that, or like, men and women alike will be like, well, he's just lucky. And it's like, yeah, but first of all, that's damaging to that child because he might grow up having a twisted idea of what consent is because he was treated that way. But also, like, not all these women are like super hot. Like they're like, they're like bulldogs. Like sometimes you get raped by a hand beast and like that. So it shouldn't matter either way. But I'm just saying, like, to just say, nice, like that's just kind of childish,
And one more thing, just to add on to this as well, is that it doesn't matter how high value or alpha you are. You get falsely accused. That's a legal problem. That's a legal issue. So this idea that just self-improvement is going to fix all of men's collective issues is nonsensical. And I wish that there'd be more attention. It just seems like there's too much of the manosphere that's just focusing on self-improvement. Like they don't even talk about circumcision. Like why are we not talking about real legitimate?
We do. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's the thing. They're not concerned with men's issues. Like a lot of them are just trying to sell something to men. And the truth is that if we had our problems figured out, there would be no market for them to do that. So I have to ask, like, how many in the manosphere don't actually want the problem solved because it would make it to where like it's going to take a cut out of their business, right? So like they won't talk about circumcision. We do it all the time. And it's a very serious issue because again, the abuse of boys starts that early, right? So, but I was gonna go back to something else, and I was gonna respond to something you said, but it just like I just blanked. Sorry, I'm getting old. But let me see. Well, okay, so what do you want to do with your channel now? Like what kind of other stuff do you want to do with It's Complicated?
Like other topics? Like, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, like do you want to just keep doing the street things? You want to go to different places? I know that you've been to, looks like you've done some events like conventions and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, one of the best things about Las Vegas is that every culture is represented out here. So, yeah, I'm definitely, there's different topics. I mean, I can almost revisit some of the old topics because in some cases, I think that my mindset is a little bit different or I've evolved and I can come up with better questions. But, I want to maybe interview some older people and talk about maybe their perspective on modern society based on, how things were, things like that.
Yeah, older people, that could be interesting, especially if they're like together still.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how much of that goes on in Vegas, but I know there's old women on the slots though.
Yeah, but I've talked to sex workers. I've talked to conservatives. I've talked to all different types of people, and I would say ultimately, I know I'm a dating channel, but I really think that I'm almost like a men's rights channel disguised as a dating channel, because I think that we really have to kind of change the laws, and we also have to change the culture. And I'm just trying to spread more awareness. And I think the first step towards any type of social change is awareness. So that's the first thing. And I'm trying to basically bring awareness to a lot of the issues that I think that other creators in the manosphere aren't necessarily talking about. But I think that, obviously, if I had to choose, I suppose red pill is better than being blue pill. But then, there's, some people are just black pill and they just give up and say it's hopeless. I'm just saying that, why be so defeatist? If things can change for the worse, why can't they change for the better? Obviously, why does anybody ever bother fighting for any social change? I think that a lot of people just don't really understand what's going on. And so I want people to at least understand what the reality of things are. And because, like I said, it's like I would keep interviewing people and hear, that's a really good question. I never thought of that before. And it's like, okay, now that you are thinking about it, now what? What's the next stage after you have had your blue pill mindset shattered?
That's right. That's exactly how I think you start. Because like the thing is, you can't do it all top down, because if people don't know why something matters, their ability to hold on to this idea will it's fleeting. It's very fragile. But if they ingrain it into themselves by thinking a lot about it, especially if people tend to do what I've noticed when I talk to people about this stuff, they're very resistant at first, and then we have more conversations, and they always pretend like they don't agree with me, or they have issue with what I'm saying, or it makes them uncomfortable. But over time, they end up changing their mind, and then they tell me that they did it on their own. Like people, because they're so. We have this thing about ourselves that we just think that we're so smart, so we just did it on our own. I'd be like, well, no, I always believe that. It's like, okay, it's okay. I'm okay with you as long as we're on the same page now. I don't care how you got there. And I think that it comes from planting that seed, and then you just let it go and let them find their way. But I think a lot of times, if they're honest with themselves and they approach it with humility, they will figure it out, or maybe they'll even bring something to you that you didn't know. Like, I'm always open to learning something else, right, that I didn't consider, and I stay open to that stuff. And I think that's why the bottom up stuff it's better, because it's more sustainable, but there are obstacles that come from legislation. So when you say that you're probably more like a men's rights channel disguised as a dating channel, what do you think are the most important men's issues? I don't like to say rights, even though that's what we get called, because I don't like the word rights. But
well, a lot of people also believe that men already have all their rights, but it's not just about men's rights, because it's just the fact that the way men are it's social issues. It's the way that men are viewed in society, things like that. But I would just say the fact that men have to kind of be appreciated for who they are, and not necessarily we have to view men as human beings and not just these success objects. And
right, human doings.
Yeah, and that men are not owned. We are not owned. We are autonomous beings, and we have to basically just be appreciated for. We have to almost develop in our own right, instead of be dictated to, like, this is what a man is. But I think that obviously, the first place everybody talks about is the family court system. That's a huge that needs so much reform. But also, the social scene, the dating process, how men and women engage with each other and interact, and how it leads to intimacy and long-term relationships and family. The fact that men need to be seen as more than just an ATM machine and a bodyguard. That's kind of how we're perceived, and that's not necessarily something that's legislated, that's just how we're socialized to be. And so that's why it's not just a men's rights issue. It's a cultural issue. And that's,
For sure.
you know, that's kind of what I'm hoping, the way that men are portrayed in the media. I mean, men are the brunt of every joke, and men are seen as the bumbling idiots on sitcoms and things like that. So
yeah,
those are just,
Bill Maher on his show. Forget the name of it, but his
Real Time.
Is it, what is it called? Bill Time? No,
Real Time.
Real Time. Yeah. On his Real Time, he did a segment on that, on fathers, specifically fathers and the way they're presented in the media around Father's Day. Now that is something, I'm not a big fan of Bill Maher, but the point is he's very mainstream. And the fact that he did that, he did a whole thing was that we have to stop doing this with dads. Like, this is obviously, we've been talking about this for 10 years, but now this is what I mean when I say I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful, because it is breaking into the mainstream, like, you know, in whatever way it must, because it's getting to the point where the legacy media can't ignore what we're talking about. Like, you know, they have their methods of trying to dismiss it. They'll say, you know, we have, like, there's probably feds watching this show right now that are keeping tabs on us because we have been put on lists, you know, from like the CIA and stuff, because they don't like the message, which is essentially, you know, trying to strengthen men to put them in their rightful place in society. And I know the reason why the government doesn't want that, because you know, a family with a strong father in its center is like, it's a nightmare for the government, because now the government can't just, you know, redistribute wealth to women, right? This is why women vote for more government, because it's like a way of getting around needing to go to a man for it. Instead, they just go to Big Daddy government, and Big Daddy government takes money from us and gives it to them. So if there are, but women who are in marriages with men and they're stable, they tend to vote for small government too, because now they see that their bottom line is being affected by things like taxation and the welfare state, right? So I think that socially, that's what we are big on. I mean, for me, like the family courts, the child custody, the false allegations, the fatherlessness, because like it's producing dysfunctional children, which are going out in the world. And I think a lot, you did a video, I think it was called Daddy Issues or something. Oh, it was one of your, what?
I just released that this morning.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, you did one on daddy issues, which I appreciate, because I bet if you go around and talk to enough people, I don't know if I finished that one. I think I almost did, but then I had to stop to do the show because I was running errands, and I was like, I'm gonna listen to some more of his videos before the show to get like boned up. But I appreciate that you did that, because I think that it's worth, people have to see that fathers matter. And so, like, if you take them out, there are effects, and everyone wants to talk about everything else except that. And the other thing is that when they do talk about fathers, and this is something that annoys me because it always comes from the conservatives, right? The quote unquote conservatives, they're not really conservative. They just blame men for not being present without understanding that most of the time women are excluding them from their children. It's not, you know, and they have the state to do that. Like they have the backing of the state to make sure, because what was the condition? You know, Lyndon Johnson, the guy who, so Lyndon Johnson was one of the presidents from like the 60s, and he put forward the Great Society, which was essentially the start of the welfare state. And there was one condition. It was like, we will give you money as long as there is not a man in the home. And that was what getting welfare was contingent on. So women were incentivized to basically keep their fathers away from their children so they can get free money from the government. And that's been going on since the 60s. So now we're like 3 generations in. So you have multiple generations of people who don't know their fathers. So like, what kind of society are you gonna get from that? Which is why, for me, that's like the most important thing, is restoring men to the rightful place in the home. And for conservatives to just what they usually do is they just shame men and say, well, you need to take your responsibility and be a dad. But it's like, but these women are choosing men who have no intention of sticking around. That's like literally, women are the gatekeepers to reproduction. They decide whether or not they're going to get pregnant and have a baby. They have all the tools. They have all the resources. They got abortion. They got abandonment. They got adoption. They got all these other things. and they choose to keep the baby despite the fact that they hooked up with a dude that's not going to stick around. And you can't shame that man into being like to sticking around. She chose poorly.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are fit fathers and there are unfit fathers. If these women choose unfit men to be fathers, like this just happened to Fresh and Fit. I think it was
Walter.
Yeah, you know about that, right?
Yeah.
Not Myron, but the other guy, right?
Yeah.
He like knocked up some chick and she was like, oh, I don't believe in abortion because of my religion, which is weird because she fucked a guy and got pregnant by him. But okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I guess that's not your religion, but this part is. And, you know, now he's basically on the hook as per the Kanye song, you know, 18 years, 18 years.
Right.
So, but the truth is that wasn't the kind of guy that was going to stick around anyway. And this is what I'm saying. Like, when women reward a certain kind of man with sex, other men will look at that and say, I'm going to try and be more like that guy because that's the guy that women reward. Incentivize bad behavior, you're going to get more bad behavior.
We're essentially blaming the individual men for systemic issues.
Yeah, partly, yes. Like the welfare state, exactly. And it's the only solution that people in the mainstream have is to just keep blaming men in the hope that they're going to like get in line. And the truth is that men are walking away, and I think it's a smart idea because they, at some point, they got to say, well, maybe women should be helping with this problem too. You know, like, and in some capacity. And I think it at least begins with them making smart choices, or at least saying, I don't really know, I need help. You know, like being able to say, I don't have it all figured out, I need help. And I think that men want that too. Like men, the Zoomers, you know, Zoomer men have swung pretty far right in terms of their beliefs, but they're still struggling to understand their masculinity because they're growing up in a feminized society. Like, I mean, like it just is, right? From school, all the, through our media, through everything that we see in around us, what is valued, what is prized, what is celebrated, womanhood in all of its forms. Or if you want to like bring in like the sort of expanded definition of gender, it's every gender except men. Like every other gender, non-binaries, quasi-genders, demi-genders, etc. All of that, but not men. Men are the only ones excluded in every single instance. So what are men supposed to do?
Right, exactly. And even when we talk about all the different genders, a woman, you know, there's so much confusion about what a woman is, but everyone can tell you what a real man is.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But also, if being a man is such a bad thing, is it any wonder that there are so many men that are just saying, I'm going to live as a woman? Because I think that's another thing that happens, right? Like they like, well, I know a guy, actually, he had him on as a Fireside Chat guest. Unfortunately, he asked me to protect his identity, so we had to take down his video. But he explicitly said, he's gone through the trans surgery because he wanted to live as a woman because he figured that living as a woman would be better. Now, I don't know how that worked out for him. Probably not well because he lives in Germany. But the fact is that the desire to do that should be something we should be like thinking about. Now, granted, that's an extreme example. Most guys aren't going to do that. But the fact that a guy got to the point where he was so ashamed about what he was that he said, if I live as a woman, my life will be better, even if I'm not really a woman, if I just look like a woman. And he's actually told me that people, you know, if they don't know that he's a man, they treat him differently. And then there was the opposite. Do you know about Nora Vincent?
I was just about to bring that up, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Self-made man, of course. Yes. This is again, like, this is something that people should know, but this is not the narratives that most people have access to. They don't understand that, you know, it's not what you think it is to walk a mile in a man's shoes. Well, that's the thing is, like, you know, occasionally, you know, you brought up like stand-up comedians and stuff, right? Like Chris Rock, for example, will have a thing like only women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally, but a man is only loved under the condition he provides. And my point is, it's like people feel what's going on, but when you or you know, they might laugh at a joke here or there, or see a little piece of evidence, you know, of you know, the inequality. But what ends up happening is when you tie all the pieces together, and that's kind of what I try to do on my channel, is, you know, construct a a narrative of all these questions, and it's like, okay, this is injustice and this is a problem and this is a problem, but when you stitch it all together and it's problem after problem after problem and everything's a double standard and it always benefits women, at what point do you start to realize that this is a prejudice against men? This is a systemic problem. This is not just men not manning up. There's something going on. There is an agenda. There is, and that's what I'm trying to do, is basically build a case so people can realize that, okay, we actually have to take this seriously, because we are not going to negotiate our way out of this, and we are not going to let this problem solve itself.
Yeah. Well, it is a problem. And like I said, though, I do think that things are changing. I think the conversation is shifting in a big way, and I'm here for it. I'm glad, because I think that, like I said, our talking points, 10 years ago when I started this, if I came up to someone, I remember I was on a flight to the International Conference of Men's Issues in 2016, I think, and it was in England. And so it was my first time in the UK, and I flew, and I was getting onto customs in the UK. And, when you go into customs, they ask you all these questions about why you're entering their country. And so the woman at customs asked me what I was there for, and I told her I'm there for a conference, and she said, "What's the conference about?" She's quizzing me, and I said, "Oh, it's the International Conference on Men's Issues." And she immediately scoffed and said, "Men's issues? What issues do men have, right?"
Yeah. Yep.
And I was like, "Well, you'd be surprised, But of course, at the time, I didn't expect her to be sympathetic. But nowadays, if somebody asked me what I do, which happened to me the other day, I went to go pick up a new car, and the guy was driving me in the Uber to North Carolina because I had to go there to pick it up. And he asked me what I do, and I said I run a podcast, and he asked me what it's about, and I told him, and he immediately was like, "Oh, I have stories for you." And he told me a bunch of stories, and he said that, he had all these issues with feminism and where we're at now in our culture. And he was an old guy. He was in his 70s, but so it wasn't he wasn't one of these, what you'd expect from somebody of that age, that they kind of have their values that comes from their generation and they never let them go. He's actually had a lot to say about it. And part of it is because he has a bunch of sons, and he's worried about his sons and his grandsons. So, I think the conversation is shifting in a big way.
I see that as well, and I agree with you, and I am hopeful. The one thing that I would like to try to get people to wake up to, though, is that feminism is not the only problem that we're dealing with. Do you agree with that? Do you see that?
I do, but I think here's the thing, though. In my opinion, I think it depends on how you define feminism. I think that our whole society is feminist. It's just how much. So the thing that at the core of what feminism is this idea that men have throughout history oppressed women at the expense of women and to the benefit of themselves. And anyone who believes that is basically a feminist. Even when you said, I don't want to, I think you said something like, and I don't want to misrepresent you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said something like, I don't want to necessarily return to patriarchy. Is that something that you said, or something like that?
I think that because in a way, what ends up happening is, if the man is expected to be the leader, then it's just going to end up with more blaming men. In other words, if you don't get a good outcome, then it's your fault because you weren't a good leader, or you know what I mean?
Is that what you mean? Yeah. Is that what you mean by patriarchy then?
In a way, because I think patriarchy is the idea of the, man being the head of the household, the man has to be the leader, and man has to be in charge. I just think that I guess more so it's the misandry is the issue, and feminists, there's modern misandry, which is feminism, and there's traditional misandry, which is chivalry. I think that,
But feminism is exploiting chivalry, though.
Well, I mean, do you think that there's
feminism is women appealing to men, to men to get them what they want. Women can't do anything without men. Women couldn't run society without men allowing it, right? Mm-hmm. Or even helping them. So when women got the vote, it was men that gave it to them, right? It was actually mostly women that were against it because they didn't want women to be drafted into war. So anytime, what I'm saying is, even now in this society that seems to be run by women, it's only doing that because men are allowing it. If men tomorrow decided that women were not going to have power anymore, they wouldn't have it, and there wouldn't be anything they could do about it.
Great point. And now, so building on that premise, would feminism have been a movement that's gained any traction without the help of men?
No, it wouldn't. So, but I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't live in the feminist framework, because the lie is that patriarchy would be harmful to women. It isn't, because patriarchy is, like, we still live in that model, because ultimately men, even now, are still responsible. They just don't have any authority. So they have responsibility but no authority, at least not in the small scale. And women have all the authority and no responsibility, which is why they're never accountable for anything, but they can do whatever they want.
I understand that. I'm saying that if men weren't chivalrous or gynocentric, how would they have enabled feminism? I think that's kind
of... Well, yeah, I think that the way it... I know, I see what you're saying. I don't disagree. And I think that gynocentrism and feminism are like, well, it's like you said, two sides of the same coin. Like, they work together. One does not work without the other, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't... Feminism only exists because men allow it, but gynocentrism is what makes men do that, where they're like, well, we should be doing this for the women, right? Yeah. Whereas maybe before, like, you know, what it meant to be chivalrous was more about like being a samurai in Japan. You know, there was like a code and all these other things, but there was great honor in doing that. You know, today it's just like how you treat women. It's not, and that's it. And that's just a small sliver of what it really used to mean. But I mean, none of those things are demanded of us anymore. So,
but don't we have a chivalrous family court system? I mean, obviously, it's based on, you know, it's based on serving the woman or catering to the woman's needs or things like that. So I think that.
Well, you could say that they just serve themselves because they make a lot of money doing that.
Right.
And they just use women as the tool, like using female victimhood to make money is sort of like, I think that's the family courts. That's feminism itself. That's like everything else that's come from it. They have jobs. Like, as long as women are seen as in need, people have job security. They get their pensions, they get their tenure, they get their, you know, their NGOs, whatever it is. So yeah, you could say, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying maybe we're just talking past each other a little bit.
Well, I mean, it obviously it's confusing. There's a lot of nuance, but I think what it comes down to is, if our goal is not equality in as many aspects as we can try to, you know, shoot for or aim for, I think that you know what I mean? Like if the pendulum swings too far in one direction, there's an inequality. If it swings too far in the other direction, there's an inequality. There's always going to be an injustice. So do we want a society of double standards, or do we want to live in a society of equality, or is that even possible? Can we achieve that?
Well, okay. So equality and justice, I think, are different. Justice, I'm all for. Equality, I don't think is possible. I think that's a pipe dream. But justice, yes, would definitely need that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, people say that men and women are not equal because we're not the same, and that doesn't make any sense, because, you know, no two people are the same, but we should have equal rights under the law, correct?
Well, that would be justice. That's what I'm saying. It's different. Yeah, I agree with justice. I think that we should be treated the same under the law for sure. But I don't. The word equality is like I'm
not saying that women should be competing in men's sports, obviously.
No, I know you're not saying that, but I think it's just using the word equality in any context is slippery, because it just isn't applicable. We're just not, like, you know, I'm not equal to myself on any given day of the week or any time of the day. So what I mean is, like, justice 100%, like, we should be treated the same under the law. It's absolutely, but I don't think that's the same as equality, is all I'm saying. Like, that's because when you get into this weeds where people start talking about equality, and then it turns into a conversation of, well, I don't believe in equity, I believe in equality, and like equity is different. It's like, but neither of those are right. Like, justice is it. Like, that's because otherwise if anyone starts concerning themselves with any kind of equality, then you run into a problem where you're measuring it from the wrong starting point. Like some people will say, and this is not related to what we're talking about, but some people will say that I don't believe in equality of outcome, I believe equality of opportunity. And I will say, well, but the problem with that is that if you have to be okay with whatever the outcomes are, but we don't do that. What we do is we look at the outcomes, even if we supposedly have equality of opportunity, and say, well, we must not have done equality of opportunity right because the outcomes are different. And it's like, no, because you're starting from a bad premise. Like, there is no equality of opportunity. There's just like the removal of obstacles that are, just sort of like unnecessary, like systemic obstacles, like things like, should men, because there's another thing is that I'm not really sure if it's okay that we try to even everything out. I think we can get like really stuck in analysis paralysis. And what we should be looking at is, okay, when it comes to child custody, we should just look at it in a case-by-case basis. Who's the most fit to raise the child? Instead of what we do now is we just tend to favor the woman by default. And then, of course, what happens is that in order to make their case, women will bring a bunch of like, oh, he's abusive. Oh, he's done some, like sexual things with my child. Like they'll do anything. And the goal is ultimately because the incentives, because the family courts and all that will say, well, if you accuse them of these things, you can get the child for this much, you can get this much money. And it's designed to tear the family apart. And ultimately, nobody's asking what is the best thing for the child. So I feel like I went a bit of a bit of a rant there. So I apologize.
You're good when you're cooking. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been going a little bit long. Let me see if we can't like try to bring it home here. So, what do you want people to know about your channel? Like if they want to go check it out. It's called It's Complicated, guys. Check it out on YouTube. I put links in the description of this video, so you can go to the YouTube channel and your Shorts channel, as well as your X page or your Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I have a Rumble page, but I haven't really updated it or anything like that. I had a TikTok page, but for some reason I haven't been able to update that. I think I'm locked out of that account. But I have a Instagram, a Facebook, and obviously my YouTube. And I basically am just trying to what I want people to know is that, I talk about dating and relationships, but I mean, I've done an episode called Legally Superior where I talk about, the injustice in the laws. I mean, I want to talk about, I want to do a dedicated episode about every one of men's issues that we face. So I could kind of do a deeper dive, and that's the thing is, and I'm trying to show my face more. I'm trying to get out there and just kind of give my opinions and do more podcasts. And then I can have a dedicated episode on my channel that I can refer to and say, okay, we want to talk about consent. Well, I've done the work. I've talked to people about this, and this is what they're saying. And, I obviously, I don't speak for everybody, and not the few people that I interview speak for everybody, but at least it gets the engagement and the dialogue going. There's a lot of very interesting comments on my page that spark all sorts of new ideas, things I've never even thought of before. Yeah. I'm still learning just like all of you. So I want it to be a process where instead of just being a channel, I want almost, my channel is more than a channel. I believe it's a movement.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good way to look at it. Are you with anyone? I'm sorry to pry on anything too personal, but do you have a girlfriend or somebody?
No. I'm currently not in a relationship. I mean, I'm open to things if something falls in my lap, but I mean,
When was the last time you saw someone?
Sorry?
When was the last time you saw someone?
I had a 3-year relationship, but it was a while ago. But I mean, it was a good relationship. I mean, I don't want people to think like, oh, I've just had like terrible relationships, and so now, I'm just
No, I didn't assume that. I was just curious if you were, what they thought about what you do.
Oh no,
do you have any friends or?
I'm just saying, it's funny that a lot of people immediately go to, who hurt you? Why did you create this channel? like you're just out to basically bash women.
Yeah, that's just another way of like attacking your masculinity.
Yeah,
that's just another way they do it, because like it'd be like, well, if you're not just putting up with things as they are right now, then you're obviously not a real man and you must be single. That's just another way they attack your masculinity. Like, I'm married, but I don't feel like I need to tell people like, by the way, guys, I'm married, so this gives me permission to criticize women.
Yeah.
No, I'm just gonna criticize women if I feel like criticizing women. Like, I don't have to. My wife's way worse than me.
Yeah.
Like, she, you know, she's like way harsher.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily always directed at women. A lot of times it's directed at the culture that allows for this to happen.
Yeah, but people, you're right. But if you just, even when you're just saying like, look, I'm just talking about the culture, I'm talking about the scene, or I'm talking about this activity, people's reaction is to go right to the women. Like, how are you hurting women in this way? And this is like, they're playing into the gynocentric trap. It's like, immediately, how are women affected by this? You know, the reason why I say that feminism and gynocentrism are like interlinked, like they can't even be separated. Charles Fourier, do you know who Charles Fourier is? He's the guy who, he's one of those French intellectuals. He coined the term feminism and defined it as essentially judging a society by how it treats its women. So that's what we do. That's what like gynocentrism is used for, or how it works in tandem with feminism. That's why I say they're not really separable. And when there is no such thing as a Tradcon that is not a feminist, like if they're espousing the gynocentric shit, then they are, you know, like Tommy Lauren or any of the Daily Wire people or whoever it is. I mean, unless you really get red pilled, and usually for men, unfortunately, it does require them to have like a terrible experience, because a lot of guys walk around, they think they're immune, that this won't happen to them, and then something does happen to them. I mean, nothing happened to me, but like all of the people in my life, my closest friends, like they all get married, they think that everything's gonna work out, and I swear, like most of them end up in horrible divorces with like children that they're not able to see, and it's like, how did this happen to this many people?
Yeah,
you know, because they all walked into this thinking everything was gonna be fine.
Why do you think that most of the people who are in this space are more like in it for like the entertainment, as opposed to, you know, having the conversations that we're having? Like most people who are in the manosphere aren't necessarily talking about gynocentrism. They're just talking about, like, why do you think they're not kind of looking at more the men's rights issues and things like that?
Yeah, well, the men's rights stuff is not sexy. It's not. Like, I think that the reason, because like the whatever, like no shade being thrown here, okay? So I appreciate all these channels for existing, because anyone who's having the conversation is adding. And if you have to get your red pill talking points from Andrew Tate or Fresh and Fit or whatever, then I guess it's, as long as it got out there, like whatever. But ultimately it's because what we do is not, it doesn't create the controversy. We're not fighting with people. We're not doing blood sports debates. We're not like calling 304s hoes and kicking them off our podcast. You know, like, I think that you mentioned these manosphere figures, and one of the ones that I actually appreciate the most is Pearl Davis. And I know that you were on her channel, but she's the only one of these like big name people that sort of got their name by hosting controversial talks, you know, and for hours at a time, with lots of women in scantily clad talking about, you know, how much they want from their man and how tall he has to be and what they're like, how they are the table and all of this. But she was the only one that actually reached out and got Paul on, and some of the people from our channel like Allison and Karen on to talk on her show. And I have a lot of respect for that, because I think that it's not like, I don't really care about clout, but I care that the message gets out. But I do want it to get out there via the people who are best qualified to talk about it. Because like, I just saw, for example, this is the last thing I'll say about it and let you talk. I know that I can go, but I watched, there's a guy named, I can't remember, it's like Warren Smith, and he does these, normally he does these reactions to debates or conversations, and he like breaks down the logic of the debates, he kind of went viral because he was like talking to one of his students about something, and it was political, but he like does these other things. But then he went on the whatever podcast, and he kind of, I wouldn't call it an ambush, but he basically, because I think that what he does is he tries to challenge people's ability to like, you know, explain their position logically and make a strong argument. But so he turned on Brian Atlas, the guy who hosts the whatever podcast, and he pressed him on a couple of issues that men face. And Brian Atlas wasn't really able to come up with anything strong, even though I'm sure he knows that they exist because he does that show. But he wasn't ready for that, and he came across looking kind of foolish. And it was like, you know, if one of us was on there, I would have been able to not only make the case, but I think Warren would have understood where I was coming from, and he would have been able to take our side. So like, I think that ultimately the people who make the best arguments are not the ones that get front and center. It's the people who just make the most noise. They have the most sizzle on their steak. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And in fact, I actually watched that stream where you reacted to that, and it was an fun stream. So that's actually, I think that's the reason that we got in touch to do something together, because I really enjoyed some of your streams on that. But the other thing is, why do you think that we don't see more of like it's always these guys debating the women and the feminists? Wouldn't you like to see, like, you know, a men's rights guy and a red pill guy and a MGTOW guy, like, you know, with all their different prescriptions debating each other? Like, obviously, you know, I
did that.
Oh,
I did that.
Yeah, because
so we did that in 2019. We had International Conference on Men's Issues. It was a live thing, like everybody could go to it. A lot of people were there. It was a big event in Chicago, Rosemont, when I still lived in Chicago. And we were we were the ones, the Honey Badgers organized the event that year. Normally we have different MRAs do it. I think this year they're trying to do something in Australia, but I don't really know the details on that yet. And we were coming up with ideas for events, and I said we should have an event called a MGTOW, a PUA, because they were called PUAs at the time, not red pillars. A MGTOW, a PUA, and an MRA walk into a bar. And so what we did was he had three guys, a MGTOW, a PUA, and an MRA. So it was, I don't remember the PUA guy's name, and I don't mean any disrespect, but he was just there selling his, you know, class or whatever. But there was that guy, I think his name was Charming Man or something. I don't know. And then there was Paul Elam, who was the MRA guy, and Terrence Popp, who was the MGTOW guy. And Terrence Popp, if you don't know who he is, he's fantastic. He's like a vet, you know, really cool dude, PTSD, had a terrible experience. And all three of them just sat down and they debated each other on the ideas, and it worked out. You know, it was even an incel chimed in because he was in the audience, and it became a conversation that went four ways for a while.
I think I would love to see more of that, because I think that, you know, because there's so many different prescriptions, some people need to be challenged on their ideas, because we're all trying to figure out the best path ahead.
Yeah, and we have to be open to, like, there are going to be people with lots of different views. That's why I think that was a good panel, because you're going to have, you know, people coming from different places. You know, the last time I did a Fireside Chat guest, I had this woman on, Erin. She has a channel called Far From Eden, I think.
I know all
these.
Yep.
Oh, you know these people. Yeah. So I got to talk to her, and she has, you know, a very different perspective, but I love her perspective, because we definitely need more women to be in this space and being very vocal, which is why I support HBR, even though I'm not, you know, I have an XY chromosome, but
at the end of the day, it's all about your voice and your ideas.
Well, these women couldn't run this thing. I have to do it. They needed a man to do the producing. So,
yeah.
But anyway, do you have any final thoughts or questions for me?
Just, I would just love to be able to, you know, spread this message, you know, have more people discover my work. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who are familiar with my work. They're just not familiar with me personally. A lot of times I'll see, you know, shorts and clips, you know, posted on other platforms, and I'm not necessarily given credit for it. So I just hope more people will just kind of like reference me or shout me out and share my work and things like that. So at least we can I think it's a great way to kind of pull people into these ideas, because like you said, it's not always sexy to watch somebody, you know, on a podcast, but if I'm interviewing people on the street, it's just it's quick, it's dynamic, it's a good way to just, you know, get the conversation started. So
yeah, I think that what you're doing is really good, because you're out there, and those men on the street, there's a lot of people that do it, but I think you're doing it really well. because you are bringing this other dimension in. A lot of times guys are just like, what's your body count, you know? So this is like way more involved. And so have you seen a lot of growth like on your channel? Is it growing?
Yes and no. It goes through different periods. Like there was one point where like when people started reacting to my stuff, it blew up very quickly. But then I don't know. It's like, I don't know if shadow banning is a thing, but like sometimes I wonder if
it totally is.
Yeah. Stuff. But
yeah,
you know, and it's weird. It's like sometimes I'll post a piece of content and then someone else will react to it and it'll get way more views, or you know, or somebody will repost a clip and it's the exact same piece of content and it'll get 10 million views, but I've never gotten anything that's gotten that high even on my own channel, which is very weird. So I don't know what's going on with the algorithm, but I just feel like as any creator, you just got to be consistent and just hopefully, you know, that it will just eventually catch on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that I think you're doing really good work. I hope you keep at it. I think that you are, probably because you're bringing up like actual issues. That's the thing that I think is the main difference, is that people who are really trying to address like the real issues and they're bringing them up, they tend to struggle more than the people who are just sort of, and I'm not blaming them for that, because like, you know, you get chase that hustle or whatever, but like the guys that are just like gonna put hot chicks on a panel and they put them in the thumbnail and they got their tongues out and their, you know, and their cleavage out, they're gonna just get more hits, and it doesn't even matter what the substance of the content is. But there could be like a bit of an overlap, because I know Andrew Wilson, who he has been on the whatever podcast multiple times, and he built his own brand off of it, I think. And I don't think that his brand is like the same content, but like one was used to grow the other, you know, like a cross pollination.
You know, it's interesting. I've asked the question, why is it that the men's movement has to be entertainment to get traction, but the women's movement didn't have to be entertaining to get traction? Have you noticed that?
Yes. I have noticed that.
But and one more thing also, one other reason also is I kind of feel like some people can't be told these things, they can only be shown. So when I'm actually showing the reactions to people being challenged in real time with these topics, that says a lot more than just coming out and just stating what the situation is, in my opinion.
Absolutely. You know, when people see it, it definitely sticks in their mind more. We're visual creatures for sure. All right, I got another Rumble rant from NovaFan21. He gives us $1 and says, at It's Complicated, I've seen people who claim to be on our side, but then claim channels like yours don't represent what a real woman or what the average woman thinks. What is your response to them?
Say that one more time, because I kind of missed that.
Okay, I'll read it again. I've seen people who claim to be on our side, but then claim that channels like yours don't represent what a real woman or what the average woman thinks. What is your response to them?
They're probably virtue signaling, I would suppose. I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of
I think they're trying to protect women still. Like they look at the women who are, because like, I mean, you're in Vegas, so you are going to get a certain kind of person, but you are looking for different kinds of people in that space. But I mean, like if you're out late at night and women have just come back from a party or like a bachelorette thing or whatever, and you're interviewing them, those are people being, what's the word, authentic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't really think they're being fake or playing it up for the camera.
Well, I think a lot of times, you know, I'll have a conversation with somebody and it seems like, okay, you know, they really get it. And then they go off and they just never give it a second thought. You know what I mean? But yeah, there are a couple times where I've interviewed some people and they have just come across so poorly. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is the internet. Like they're on the internet forever. Or they just get roasted so much in the comments. It's like, how could you not learn something from your appearance on this show? But some people just double down and just say, hey, F the haters, and you know, this is what I believe. And that, you know, so attention
is attention.
Yeah.
So they get it, right? All right. So yeah, that's it. I think thank you so much. Would you be willing to come back on again sometime?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. And we, just so you guys know, we are planning to have another get together, another like meetup. So like COVID kind of killed meetups for a little while, but now that everyone's coming out of the darkness, We're going to be doing another meetup this year the plan is September, Calgary, Alberta. So hope you have your passport if you're in America. But like we'll get more details later, but it's going to be a Badger meetup, and Allison has some plans, some little like talks and presentations. So we should be on the lookout for that. So all right, Jonathan, thank you so much. Guys, links to his stuff is in the description. It's Complicated channel. It's great. Check it out. Lots of cool videos on there. And thanks, guys, for coming on the show. If you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed in the show today. And please, please, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat, and we'll talk to you guys in the next one.
Are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.